Greetings, fellow explorers, and welcome to the fourth episode of Geekoscopy 101. It's the science podcast show. Usually an interview with one person, but this time we have multiple people because we have multiple cool people doing a cool initiative. And I'm your host here today, Mcginnis, aka Dr. Kiston. And today we're exploring making cosplays for science with none other than Cosplay for Science. How are you guys doing?
Doing well. Glad to be here.
Doing well.
Everyone's surviving the coronavirus, I imagine, somehow.
Mostly.
Yeah, doing all right.
Hold it in there.
So tell us a bit about you guys and what you guys do.
So yeah, my name is Gabriel Santos. I'm a collections manager and outreach coordinator paleontologist at the Alf Museum of Paleontology here in Los Angeles, California. I used to study marine mammal evolution, but now I mostly focus in educational research, focusing on natural history and deep time. And of course, I am one of the co-founders as well of Cosplay for Science.
Yeah, and I'm Brittney Steinberg. I'm the Outreach and Communications Coordinator for the Western Science Center, which is a natural history museum in the Inland Empire region of Southern California. So it's about an hour east of Los Angeles. And I'm also an environmental studies master's graduate student at the California State University, Fullerton. And I'm also one of the multiple co-founders of Cosplay for Science. Oh, and I study, currently what I study is actually land mammals. Specifically, I study Miocene horses. So I study some horse ancestors.
Hello, everyone. My name is Isaac Mcginnis. I am currently a graduate student at the University of Chicago. I just started about a year ago, but I'm originally from south of Los Angeles in Orange County. I grew up in Anaheim, and one of the things that I was always interested in as a kid were fossils and sort of by extension science. And one of the awesome things sort of as I got older was I was able to find how to make that into a career. Currently, I study the evolution of mammals, and that's encompassed everything from marine mammals to terrestrial mammals that include horses, camels, elephant ancestors here in North America. Currently, I'm interested in studying the evolution of hands and feet in terrestrial mammals.
That's pretty cool. You guys are all interested in very, I would say, really important stuff to look back at over the history of evolution and mankind. But bringing it back to modern culture, I'd like, I think, Gabe, you might be the best to answer this. For those who don't know, who might be listening, what exactly is cosplay?
So cosplay is a combination of two words, costume and play. And basically, it's where you dress up as a character from a video game, comic book, TV show, anything that's from like pop culture, fandom. And you dress up and kind of act like that character. Usually you're at a comic book convention or any kind of pop culture convention. But it's whenever you really just dress up and kind of have fun with it from those kind of characters.
Yeah, it's cool. It's if you go to any kind of geek culture convention, you will see cosplay there. It's quite big. Even here in South Africa, the cosplay scene is getting bigger. I think we did send some people overseas to compete, and we got some winners recently. But
that's awesome.
Talking about you guys and your initiative, how exactly did Cosplay for Science come about?
Cosplay for Science started between me and Brittney, actually. Like the first idea was between us two. So at my museum, we have events called Discovery Days. And so one of the first times I did it, like without really calling it Cosplay for Science, is we had a Making Monsters event where we talked about paleontology and pop culture. And I dressed up as Professor Oak to talk about fossil Pokemon. So that was the first time I did something that was kind of cosplay related. And then Brittney, her museum, had a cool idea of going to... which one was it again, Brittney? It feels so long ago.
Yeah, I know. I believe it was Comic-Con Revolution, which was a local Comic-Con here in Southern California. And our museum does a lot of outreach booths at events like that. So comic book conventions, air shows. We really try to go beyond just typical science venues when we go out with a booth with, touchable 3D prints of fossils, information about our museum. we went to this comic book convention and we asked the ALF Museum to join us. So we had our two museums set up right next to each other at this comic book convention. And I think a couple weeks before we went, we were like, what if we're all paleontologists, so we need something to dress up as. It's a comic book convention. So we were like, what if we dress up as Jurassic Park characters? And so staff from both of our museums, we were both right next to each other, dressed up as Jurassic Park characters for the duration of the comic book convention. And it was a pretty big hit.
Yeah, it was kind of like, if we're going to be at a comic book convention, we're all nerds anyway, outside of our jobs. Like, we all love nerdy things. We're the Jurassic Park generation. So we were like, if we're going to go big. So we did Jurassic Park. I was Dr. Alan Grant. Brittney was Dr. Ellie Sattler, and all of the rest of our, team and staff members, even the director of Brittney's museum cosplayed for the day. He was,
Is he Mr. Hammond?
Yeah,
Mr. Hammond,
he was
yes.
Mr. Hammond.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Isaac. We do so many cosplays now. I get confused on names. But basically after that first event, we realized how easy it was for people to come talk to us when we were in cosplay, because they didn't necessarily think we were scientists at first. They thought of us as cosplayers first. And then after we kind of broke down that barrier with our audiences and they realized we were scientists, they were much more inclined to stay and talk with us and share stories. And we were happy to talk about the science. Then it became this really fun thing. And so from there, we're like, okay, this is something. We have an idea. So Brittney and I came up with the first version of Cosplay for Science. And then we invited our other colleagues and really good friends, Isaac, and our other co-founder, Michelle Barboza, who now works at the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles. And together, all four of us came up with the official version of Cosplay for Science.
Okay, that's pretty cool. What are each of you guys' most popular and least popular cosplays at these events?
I think that depends on who's talking. For me, our most popular one is our Star Wars inspired Galactic archive, just because Star Wars is the best thing in the world. It's just awesome. I get to dress up as a Jedi. For me, it's awesome. I get to dress up as a Jedi. And whenever we have that out there, we have so many people who come and talk to us about the natural history specimens we bring that are related to, the world of Star Wars, that inspired the creatures and the planets of Star Wars. I'd say for me, that's our most popular one. I don't know what our least popular one is. Maybe the one that we've had the least interaction was maybe our Game of Thrones one. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Game of Thrones, but we've only done that one once, and we for that one hitched our wagon to the cultural zeitgeist, since I think when we did Game of Thrones, the season was ending the next day after we finished it. So Game of Thrones was a brief one that we did, but I did find that one very fun. That was fun to make activities for.
How did you tie Game of Thrones into education activities?
So one thing we did was we always do try to have some sort of educational component, some sort of activity, something that guests can interact directly with. So one thing we did was we had an activity sheet where in Game of Thrones, each family or house has a sigil. And so we made an activity where kids were encouraged to make their own sigil using Ice Age animals of dragons or deer or whatever else it might have been. So we would say, here, make a sigil using the Ice Age animals that you've seen on the table, because we had 3D prints of Ice Age fossils on the table for them to observe. So something like that. That was just a nice, fun activity for them to be able to do.
Isaac, you've done a couple with us, right?
Yeah, I've done a couple. I would say that for me, the probably the most successful one was the one we did in Ontario. So it wasn't a part of the original Jurassic Park crew, but I was a part of I don't know, maybe the second or third time it was done at a Comic-Con. But that one for me was probably that one was probably the most successful, and it was fun because I like Gabe said, I was a part of the Jurassic Park generation. That's definitely what started my interest, but I would say after that, it was sustained by reading and sort of walking with dinosaurs and other things. But that one was really fun because there were just a lot of kids who were there, a lot of kids and also a lot of like adults who were there and like already connected with the movies and with the characters. And so being able to dress up as those characters and kind of talk about my experiences as a paleontologist and paleontology in Southern California, it was really nice to see people just really connect with that and be surprised at learning how much of the things that they love in terms of paleontology and the science is actually in their own backyards. So that was probably the funnest one for me.
What are you guys not too fond about about the Jurassic Park movies? Like, what do you hate that's in there?
Oh, okay. We're going to go down this route. For me personally, I wouldn't say like I have my own opinions on like realism versus believability and versus like what needs to be done for storytelling. So yeah, the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park are not very accurate, right? They're outdated models, at least on the exterior. Like some of the body posture is pretty close to accurate. Some of like their the sizes are wrong, or some things like that. But what I think was the worst, one of the things that I'm most disappointed in a lot of times with Jurassic Park is how it sacrifices believability for sensationalism in science sometimes, where they can still have things that are not necessarily scientifically accurate but scientifically believable, but sometimes they just go past that and just make these really outlandish things where it's like I think in Jurassic World they spliced human DNA, right? In was it the Indoraptor? No, Indominus Rex. And for me that was just kind of like it pulled away from the heart of Jurassic Park of like where the first one was like, it was a horror movie, right? Where we took science, we created these dinosaurs, and then the dinosaurs got loose. It's a whole thing about like trying to manipulate nature and how nature will just, you can't control nature in the end, really, right? And so it was a horror movie about dinosaurs, and that was really cool. But then in Jurassic World, it just kind of felt like it got a little out of hand, and they forgot what the heart of Jurassic Park was. And that was for me, at least.
For me, with the Jurassic Park, like, yes, as Gabe said, some things are inaccurate now. That part doesn't really bother me, honestly, because it's not what Jurassic Park was ever trying to be. Jurassic Park is like Gabe said, a horror movie with dinosaurs. And I enjoy it as a piece of fiction, as a really enjoyable movie. So, and it was partially responsible for me being inspired to be a paleontologist. And so that I think is more valuable than having it adhere to some sort of gold standard of accuracy. Feeling that it inspired in a lot of us who are of the age now that are, getting into our careers in paleontology, I think is more important than, just 100% accurate to what the science said at the time. They did well enough. I'm kind of with Gabe where it's like the sequels are the parts where I start getting a little like, you didn't have to go that far. You didn't have to go that outlandish. But if we're just talking about the original, I don't really want to hold it tight to, some semblance of accuracy. I find it quite enjoyable without that. And it feels kind of unfair to on a movie that's 30 years old on its paleontology when we've increased our knowledge so much since then. Now, I do kind of wish, I understand in the latter sequels that they've made justifications for it, but I really wanted to see like a feathered raptor or a feathered T-Rex or something to that effect. And I'm still disappointed I didn't get it. That's okay. Get over it. So I enjoyed Jurassic Park regardless of its accuracy or not, because I'm not going to look at a fictional horror movie, is what Jurassic Park is, for paleontological accuracy.
For sure.
Yeah.
What about you, Isaac?
So I think I share similar feelings for sure. I think one thing that I didn't think of when I was a kid watching the movie, or even I would say even 5 or 6 years ago before I started going to school to study paleontology, I think I would enjoy seeing a lot more of what it's actually like to be a paleontologist. So if you watch the first movie, and I think a little bit of the third, they actually have, although it's not necessarily accurate of all, paleontological digs or excavations, they talk a little bit about it, or they show a little bit about what it's like to be in the field. But a lot of the later movies kind of don't do that at all. And I think when I was a kid, one of the things I was really interested in was like, why are there people out in the middle of nowhere digging for things and finding just these crazy bones that belong to, these ancient animals in the ground? And that was something that really piqued my interest and sort of got me to read books and look at pictures of actual dinosaur fossils, and then later on other types of ancient animals. I think I probably would have enjoyed seeing a little more of that. Not make it the highlight, because at the end of the day, it's about the fun. I watched Jurassic Park because I want to see people running around, running away from dinosaurs. I think that's the fun part. But at the same time, I also was interested with a little bit of the science, and it doesn't have to be, the most, I don't need a scientific paper, but I think even just showing a little bit of that process is interesting. And, even if it's, discussing a little bit about what it's actually like to be a paleontologist, I always enjoyed those parts. So
I agree with you guys that it functions well as a kind of gateway into paleontology, and it doesn't necessarily have to be scientifically accurate. And it's not. And obviously our knowledge is changing over time, which means that it becomes less and less accurate as we're going forward. But moving off from the nerdy debate to the geeky debate, how do you guys feel about the Jurassic Park series becoming more actiony and less horror?
Nah. For me, like, for me, I mean, like when I first saw Jurassic Park in theaters, I was 4 years old, and I was so terrified at the Velociraptor kitchen scene that I had to leave because I was just so scared. But also at the same time, because it was so scary and they kind of created these realistic dinosaurs, it drew me in too, right? The story and everything was just so great and enthralling. Even though I was scared, I still wanted to see it. In the later movies, I'm obviously older now. I'm not 4. I'm a little less scared of horror movies, but like I just didn't get that feeling of first wonder and then terror that you get in that first movie. I remember watching Jurassic World and actually leaving the theater very disappointed because, one, I didn't feel any of the wonder that I felt in the first movie, and I actually didn't feel scared. I just felt like I was watching a big budget action movie. It did have fun moments, don't get me wrong, but it didn't pull me in. And so I missed the horror element of it. There's a lot of artistry that goes into creating good horror, and these last movies just haven't been able to reach that level.
Yeah, definitely not. I wouldn't even argue that latter movies are in the same genre as the original. Like you said, Jurassic Park itself is very much a horror movie. It's not an action adventure movie. And the narrative that it paints is from the horror tradition. And so I don't consider the latter movies like Jurassic World in the same genre as the original. And yeah, I've watched the original Jurassic Park, second one, and the third one somewhat so many times. I was slightly too young to see the original Jurassic Park in theaters, but I saw Lost World in theaters when I was like 4. And I know it's not as good, but I love it anyway. And I've watched those constantly since then. I haven't really watched Jurassic World or its sequel. So, yeah, I just kind of think I view them as two separate genres, and I'm not as interested in the action adventure sort of genre that they placed it in. I don't think that that's the best fit for it. I'd be very interested if they had leaned more into the horror elements, which I think they did in the last sequel, but not to the extent that I was hoping. So,
what about you, Isaac?
Yeah, I would say I think I very much agree with what Brittney is saying, in that I consider them two totally separate genres in terms of what the original movie was going for, and then sort of what it later became. When I go to the theaters and a new one comes out, I think I very much go with the intention of I'm just here to see,
a movie.
Yeah, I'm just here
Eat
to
some
see,
popcorn, drink
dinosaurs
some
chase
cola.
people around, and whatever way that takes place, I don't leave disappointed because I'm just kind of like, well, I kind of got what I came for, right? Like, but I certainly agree that I would very much enjoy a return to the horror aspect of it, because I think another movie that's different, but also could sort of be classified, or definitely is classified, as sort of science fiction horror. Although I feel the movie I'm about to mention adheres so much more closely to that, is Alien. And I enjoy sort of the idea of having to creep around and be afraid of when the monster is going to pop out. And I think the original Jurassic Park did that more and did it more effectively. So either way, I think I leave sort of coming with what I look for, but the originals, specifically the first one, I think are for me the better movies, because I like that aspect of what they were.
What other paleontology related media would you guys recommend people view, watch, read? That's not a science paper or a textbook, obviously.
I think definitely I like to recommend. Well, I know people have feelings about it, but Disney's Dinosaur, the animated one with Aladar, I actually thought I really like that movie.
Love that movie.
Sure, some of the dinosaurs have lips and stuff, but how else are you going to make a dinosaur talk in animation, right? It's not going to look right if you don't give him lips. Yeah. And they still did a lot of research.
I was just saying, like, I also love that movie, and sure, they have lemurs and dinosaurs hanging out at the same time, which is not accurate, but that movie is gorgeous. I love that movie. Underappreciated. It's something that hasn't come out yet, but I'm looking forward to it. Don't know if we'll see it this year or if it'll be next year, since things are getting pushed back. But I'm curious to see what Ammonite is like. So Ammonite is an upcoming movie about Mary Anning, who was one of the first known female paleontologists. And I don't remember who's in it, but I'm curious to see how it goes. I don't know how much they'll focus on her actual work. That's one that I'm looking forward to, and I want to see it really badly. Don't know how it'll be, so we'll see. I could have a completely different opinion about it in a year.
I'll put it on my to-do list. What about you, Isaac?
So I would say, I think after so another series that I really enjoyed watching that I've sort of mentioned is Walking with Dinosaurs. That was always a fun one. It's a little older now. The CGI doesn't really hold up, but it's still fun. I got a lot of my sort of fix for not just dinosaurs, but creatures through a lot of different avenues. And they always sort of got me curious as to like, oh, what is that based on? And I always try to sort of understand, if I see, some sort of weird looking creature in a movie, where did the inspiration come from? And for me, I think a lot of that just came from some of the other science fiction films I watched. And I would often like delve into sort of the makings of those featurettes. But in terms of like sort of dinosaur stuff, I think, or just paleontology stuff in general, Walking with Dinosaurs is always fun. There's also PBS Eons. I have two nieces that I like to watch those videos with, because they always leave interested, and they're just always like, what is that? Because it's got good animations. It's got sort of charismatic personalities that are explaining the things as you go along. So those would be mine.
Yeah.
I just thought of a comic book. Oh, sorry.
Go for it.
Ricardo Delgado's Age of Reptiles is an amazing comic book, illustrated by the great Ricardo Delgado. The illustrations in that comic book are fantastic, and there's actually very little text in it. it tells like these little vignette stories of dinosaurs living in the age of reptiles during the Mesozoic, and actually some other reptiles like marine reptiles and stuff. And you follow the panels of these stories without any text, and it's beautifully done. Every frame is a painting, and it's just a really, really great look into the world of the Mesozoic through an artist lens. And so if you can pick up Age of Reptiles, I would definitely recommend that.
Definitely check it out. Well, this won't be that new to our viewers because we had an archaeologist a couple of episodes ago. And I did say that before I went to be a marine biologist, which is what I am now, I wanted to be a paleontologist because of walking with dinosaurs, watching that on TV every Sunday night in South Africa. That lasted about 4 years until I realized that dinosaurs weren't a thing anymore. You couldn't find one walking around because I was a kid. Obviously, I was 4 years old. But yeah, walking with dinosaurs, I also recommend. But back to cosplay for science. What are you guys' most highlight moments that you experienced while you were cosplaying for science?
Oh, so many. For me, I would say it's not. This one isn't necessarily a exact science moment, but a lot of what we do with cosplay for science also is, me, Isaac, and Michelle are both, underrepresented minorities in science. Brittney is a woman in science, right? And so we try very hard to bring representation of us wherever we go as scientists. Part of our whole thing with Cosplay for Science is to show people that a scientist can come from anywhere, right? Anyone can be a scientist. So my favorite interaction was at a pop-up museum. I was talking to this little kid and, just talking about dinosaurs, same old conversation. And he left. I was like, okay, cool. That was great. And then he came back and then the kid was like, excuse me, are you Filipino? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, I've never met a Filipino scientist before. And then he ran away to his mom. And I sat there like, I'm about to cry. So that probably is my favorite interaction.
That's pretty cool. Yeah.
I have something similar. Where it was talking to the little girl. It was so cute and I was asking such good questions, and it was the same kind of thing. I was, telling her that I was a scientist, and she thought that was really cool, and she hadn't really met any female scientists. That's always cool, is when you can inspire little kids. But I've really enjoyed talking to the adults that I've met at these kinds of events. So I got into paleontology a little late. I have an unusual background. So it was cool to be able to tell adults who said they loved paleontology when they were a kid and then, kind of fell out of it, saying, oh, yeah, that kind of happened to me too. But then I went back and now I'm doing this for my career. And they're like, oh, that's really cool. There's this sort of idea that paleontology is one of those sciences that kids are interested in and it is relevant to adults. And it's very cool to be able to make adults realize that this is still something they can care about. This is something they don't have to be embarrassed about. This is something that they can also enjoy in whatever way they want. Maybe somebody I talk to, like, now I'm going to change my entire career. But what's more likely is that they're like, hey, yeah, I'm going to go visit a museum. I'm going to go think about this more. And so it's also great is like when I can inspire an adult to also think about paleontology, also think about deep time, and so show them that scientists are super approachable because we're gigantic nerds who dress up in costume.
I think for me, so it's a little different for me sometimes because I live in Chicago, and before that I lived in Florida. So often whenever there are cosplay events that are going on in Southern California, which is where Gabe and Brittney are located, I am not able to participate in them. Were I here, I would definitely participate. But often what I'll do is I'll be doing some sort of pop-up museum. At the time, I was with the University of Florida when I was doing my master's. Now I'm at the University of Chicago. Often what I do is I tell people about Cosplay for Science and some of the things that we've done. And I think it's sort of a recurring moment, but I always enjoy when whether it be my colleagues who have same interests in like nerd and geek culture, or even, younger students that I'm sort of talking to at the museum or at some sort of pop-up museum event, when I show them that, like, hey, we're scientists, but look at the stuff we like to do, they're like, I like to do those things. Or I think that's really cool. How do I find out more about it? And so I really enjoy directing them towards meeting people who share similar interests. And often a lot of those interests overlap. There's a lot of intersectionality there in that, sometimes it's hard to imagine how someone who reads papers all day or who is doing science could also like, dressing up as their favorite science fiction character or their favorite, anime character or whatever, whatever it is you're interested in. But showing them that sort of, hey, you can be all these things, and it's so fun, and this is how you can get involved in science, or if you're interested in it. It's just always a great moment, because often what I get is like, that is so cool. How do I find out more? Who's that? Who's that? And I get to tell them, oh, these are my friends. I have two nieces who really enjoy watching some of the cosplay stuff that Brittney and Gabe do, and as well as Michelle. And I'm always like, hey, check it out. These are my friends. And they're just like, whoa.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Something that Brittney just reminded me of when she said that, younger children are the ones that are kind of interested in paleontology and then fizzles off. And it reminds me of this meme that says that one of the most disappointing things about adulthood is that nobody asks you what your favorite dinosaur is anymore. So, so what is everyone's favorite dinosaur?
That's actually great. And actually, we try very hard to ask that questions to our adult members when they come to the booth, because we know how that feels. For me, my favorite dinosaur is the Parasaurolophus. That's the dinosaur with the long crest behind its head. And it makes that really cool trumpeting noise. And I don't know, it's just such a cool, weird dinosaur. And that crest is such a odd evolutionary feature, and how it's, their nasal cavities and the way it's adapted for sound resonance is just such a cool thing. And I've loved it since I was a kid, because it's such a weird looking thing, and I love weird looking animals. And so the Parasaurolophus is definitely my favorite dinosaur.
My favorite dinosaur is also Parasaurolophus. Yeah, I love that dinosaur. I've loved it since I saw Jurassic Park: The Lost World. But I do wish we would sometimes expand this question to, what's your favorite prehistoric animal? Because in front of that, I like a good dinosaur like the next paleontologist, but I have to admit, for me, in front of that is things like mastodons, which are these prehistoric elephants, ichthyosaurs. I have a tattoo of an ichthyosaur because I love them so much, which is a marine reptile. And I study horses, so I love my little three-toed 18 million year old horses. So before you get to dinosaurs, I have a bunch of favorites, but I will say, if you're going to make me say which dinosaur, Parasaurolophus is. I'm
going to deviate from my colleagues and say that my favorite dinosaur is actually Allosaurus, and it's because of Walking with Dinosaurs. They had a special episode that was dedicated to Big Al. I believe he's from Utah. And I remember as a kid just being fascinated, because there was all of this story about injuries that he had sustained. And it was just, it really painted a narrative for not just look at these bones, but you could actually tell how an animal had lived. And I was just so fascinated. I was like, wait, but this was so long ago, yet we can reconstruct their life just by looking at their bones. So I would say, Allosaurus is probably my favorite dinosaur. Because Brittney said her favorite sort of prehistoric animal, I will go ahead and say that my favorite prehistoric animal is probably a walrus, fossil walruses. There's a variety of them. I studied them for my undergrad, and I've just been fascinated with marine mammals, but in particular, walruses have a very special place in my heart.
It's pretty cool. Interesting. I'll have to go and look up some of these because they don't sound that familiar to me. But my favorite dinosaur is probably, well, the reason why it's funny is because of Power Rangers. Watching Power Rangers as a kid and identifying with Billy so much. I love Triceratops. That's my favorite. So
Triceratops is awesome.
Triceratops, the best, and the color blue as well. So as you guys are continuing your endeavors and trying to, do outreach and science education to the public, what are some of the toughest challenges that you guys face in this teaching endeavor?
Say for me, it's just developing our narratives, like trying to make things connect in a way that is very easy for people to understand. Cosplay for Science, we aren't necessarily trying to get people to remember facts at our pop-up museums. That's definitely a bonus. But our main goal with Cosplay for Science is to get people to think critically and practice those critical thinking skills by learning to ask the right kind of questions in fictional worlds, right? And then they can take those skills that we help them to develop and bring them into the real world. And so the challenge for me is finding places where we can get them to ask questions. Building the first iteration of our Star Wars pop-up museum, the Galactic Archive, was very difficult because I was having trouble finding places where I can be like, how can I get people to ask the right questions, to think about the connection between science, these fantasy fictional stories, and their regular lives. And so trying to do things like, okay, we're on Hoth. How can I get people to think about adaptations to cold with the Tauntaun? And so I started to think about let's bring bighorn sheep evolution. Let's bring cold adaptations on other animals, compare it to the Tauntaun, and things like that. And so for me, at least, that's kind of my biggest struggle when we're developing our pop-up museums, is trying to find where we can easily introduce these critical thinking moments, I guess.
I think sometimes a big challenge in when you're actually doing the outreach. And I will say most people are, if they're very eager to learn, they think what you're doing is cool, even if they're not super interested in it. So most people, if they're not super interested in it, they're just going to walk away and they're going to be like, well, that was neat. Occasionally you get somebody who will, something that we face a lot of times, for example, with fossils, is a question of, oh, how much is this worth? We are all part of a society that does not encourage the sale of fossils. And so we say, well, they're priceless or something like that. But some people, commercial fossil hunting is and a black market is something that can happen. And so we have to educate people about that. So generally, there's always a couple of people who, either sometimes they think the fossils are fake. Sometimes they want to know how much they're worth and don't see the educational value. So that can be a challenge. But that's a very small percentage in terms of everybody we see. Most people we see think it's the coolest thing ever. So, you do what you can with the more difficult people, but that's the same as any kind of sort of museum encounter.
I think for me, one of the, and it's more of just like a personal struggle, I think, is so because I'm currently in a PhD program, I've been very big. And one of the hardest things is just, getting to the party, getting to finding the time to attend museum events. I am a researcher at the Field Museum, so there's lots of events that are constantly going around, but it can be difficult to sort of find space in between trying to do research, taking classes. But one of the things I really enjoy is that during the summers, I come back home and spend time with my family, spend time with Gabe, Brittney, Michelle, and often there are lots of events that are coinciding with this. So I'm able to hop on and really take advantage of the fact that I don't have as many distractions as I do when I'm usually at school and when I'm usually doing my other things. So for me, that would probably be the biggest struggle, is just getting to the party. But I'm also very interested in incorporating outreach and education into my degree. So one of the things I'm trying to figure out is how best I can sort of mesh those two worlds, because they are very much so connected. It's just about trying to find a way to do it in which you can sort of do everything at the same time. But yeah.
Indeed, yeah. Time management is always a problem with us scientists. It's can't seem to find it. You can explain time and space, but you can't find it anywhere. As a scientist,
right?
That's the hard part.
I feel like even now, when we're working from home, in my head, I was all like, "Oh, I'm going to have more time to do things," but in reality, for some reason, I'm busier than ever.
Yeah, same. What is time?
What is time? That is the question. So I think, Gabe, you're the only one who did a TED Talk, right?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure. So what was it like having to give a TED Talk about cosplay?
Oh man. When I got the invitation, it was really cool to be able to just talk about cosplay, right? That was super awesome. I didn't think I would be able to get a chance to do that on a TED stage. And so that was really cool. And then when I got to the actual stage, it was terrifying, first of all, because when you do a TED Talk, you have to memorize your speech completely. Like Brittney and Michelle were there to give me support and help me practice. And we were practicing right before. And then unfortunately, when I got on stage, we were doing our TED Talk outside and I was in full Jedi outfit. And it was hot. It was really hot, remember? And so as soon as I got on stage, it was so hot.
I felt so bad for you because I was backstage helping him and I was sweating and I was not in a full Jedi costume. I was in a sundress. I was spritzing water, and poor Gabe. They were like, it's the middle of summer. Let's do this TED Talk outside in the mountains. In the sun. But he did great.
Have any shade. And so as soon as I started talking, I was so hot and also very nervous because I'm in front of all these people. This is my first time doing a TED Talk. I was like, everyone's judging me. There's cameras on me. It's being recorded. I forgot my line immediately. And so I stood there in silence for 20 seconds, but it felt like hours, just oh my God, I forgot. So they let me restart. And then as I kept going, it eventually turned from fear to just feeling so cool on stage, especially after I swung my lightsaber for the first time. I actually felt really cool and I felt very empowered actually being on stage as a Jedi, talking about empowering our community and teaching, people about science. And so it was this really cool evolution that I felt. But in the end, I was very proud of what I did and I felt so cool and I felt just so honored to be able to talk about cosplay on a TED stage. That was something I never thought I was going to do in any realm. And yeah, it was just awesome. And I still today am just wow, I got to do that. That was pretty cool. And I, every now and then I'll retweet it, be like, hey, look what I did last year. Look what I did. Look what I did.
Yeah, I'll be bragging.
He did a great job.
It was a really entertaining TED Talk to listen to. I looked at the view count and I was like, why is the view count so low? And this is such an interesting subject.
Thank you.
But when I was listening about it, I was reminded about a concept that I heard. I forget who the author of the book is, but the concept that humans are a storytelling species or a storytelling animal. And I think that's kind of what you are trying to go for, is to try and blend stories together so that you can teach scientific principles or just evidence-based knowledge. So how are you on your journey towards trying to do that?
Oh yeah, that's absolutely right. Like you said, humans are storytelling species, right? All of our culture is based on the ability to pass knowledge, right? Our very first scientific explanations were stories that were passed verbally. And so with today, our modern legends and stories are our movies and comic books and books like that. It's easy to utilize storytelling narrative to not only bestow information, but I learned last year that when you're teaching is actually an exchange, right? So us as the science storytellers, we share our stories of science. And what we hope to get out of it is an exchange from our audience to give us not only curiosity, but share their love and passions of whatever they're interested in with us. And we can help bridge and make the connections to the science. So it's when I talk about Star Wars, I talk to a Star Wars fan who's like, I love Star Wars. Did you see this animal? And they're like, what is it about? And then I'm like, yeah, I'll talk to you and tell you what inspired that creature. And the next thing you know, we're talking for 10 minutes about different elements of Star Wars and connecting the science between it. And so, yeah, it's storytelling is the basis of everything. Even when we write a paper, we're technically writing a story. It's just a very different language. But it's still science storytelling. Everything is storytelling. And actually, Brittney is a journalism major, so she understands this better than any of us in the group.
I mentioned earlier I have an unusual background that I actually have an undergraduate degree in English. So before I even had any inkling in my brain that I would become a paleontologist, I actually thought I would become an academic professor of English. And I still love the humanities. And yeah, that's part of what I love about Cosplay for Science is it allows me to marry this love of story, love of narrative, love of history even, and love of culture with paleontology. I'm very much of the idea that there is no reason for us to separate science and humanity. I think both of those sort of disciplines work better together. We can see that in the intersection of science and art when we look at paleo art and scientific illustration. That's an integral part of how we communicate science. And I think science can only benefit from the integration of story and journalism and things like that. And so I'm very much a proponent of that. I don't really like the idea that we often carry with us when we educate people saying, like when I was younger, I was very, very good at like writing and history and things like that. And my math grades were terrible. My math and science grades were abysmal when I was a child. But I loved science anyway, but I was actively discouraged from pursuing it. They were saying, oh, you're not so good at the math and science, so you should think about something else. You're very good at writing. You're very good at history and memorizing dates. Why don't you think about that? And I don't think that services anybody to say, well, you're bad at science, so you shouldn't be a scientist. I'm very much of the thought that idea that we have that some people are good at science and some people aren't. Some people are good at writing and some people aren't, is only doing us a disservice in the long run.
How do you feel about it, Isaac?
I'd have to agree with Brittney. I think so similar to Brittney. Although Brittney did in her undergrad, she had a degree in journalism and English. When I said before that Jurassic Park was sort of one of the first things that got me interested in dinosaurs, and then I kind of fed into it through reading books and watching documentaries my mom would rent from the library. But despite being very interested in ancient life, I was not very good at sort of traditional elementary, high school courses. I actually didn't do very well in math, science. The only thing I really liked to do was read. And I remember once I was getting close to graduating high school, I was very much not intending on going to college. I didn't really think that it was for me. It was actually a couple of my teachers who really encouraged me, and my mom, who were like, no, you should pursue college. If you want to get ahead in life, this is the way you do it. And in a way, I was almost, sort of convinced to go to college. But even once I went to college, for my undergrad, it didn't cross through my mind I should do a science major. I remember when I was a kid, I was interested in dinosaurs, or I was interested in biology. It was just something that wasn't on my radar. I started as an English major because I really like to read, I like to write, but then eventually decided, I think what I want to do is I want to be a teacher, because when I was in high school, my teachers invested so much energy into me in order to convince me to get where I am now, and it's paying off. I want to be that for someone else. But I sort of took a geology course and remembered, oh my gosh, I really enjoyed doing these things. But in my head, it was a little conflicting, because I was like, oh, I really like studying, the past, but I'm not really good at some of these other parts of science. But what ended up happening was, as I took more courses and as I was very much not catering towards being sort of, I guess, this is going to sound weird, but not catering towards being the best student, but more so catering towards my own interests, it sort of flipped a switch in my head in which I was like, oh, I don't have to think of myself as being good at math or good at science. I can just look at myself as being really interested in the past and interested in how, ancient life was. And because I'm pursuing this interest, everything else just kind of came along. I got better at those other things. I got better at my math. I got better at chemistry, biology, because I was very much pursuing my interests. And it's very funny now because I sometimes, my mom tells me, she says, if you would have told me when you graduated high school that you'd be pursuing a PhD living far away from me, she's like, I couldn't even have imagined that, because you just didn't have that. You didn't show that was sort of your primary interest. But I think what it was for me in the end was, it's not that I was trying necessarily to be a scientist, or that I always knew that I wanted to be a scientist. It was more so I pursued an interest and a passion, and I was like, oh, this is kind of what like really gets me jazzed about school. And then those other things, not to say that they were easy, but they came. Like they came along with the territory. I cared about getting better at math, because I knew that it was something that would help me learn more about ancient life. So
what you were actually interested in. Yeah. And I think, I had this discussion with Nathan Schreiber, who is an author of a graphic novel series called Science Ninjas and the Valence board game. And we basically agree that some things in school are just delivered in such a way that it just puts the kids off, and they don't actually want to learn it in any way, because it's so
Absolutely.
dull, so that's why I think, things like having a comic book about learning this principles, or having you guys to explain this thing, in cosplay, so that you have this kind of veil of something that is intriguing or wondrous, to look at first, before you just get bombarded with facts or numbers, which is not that interesting, and it doesn't really, I would say, appeal to our storytelling brain, because it's just like abstract.
Yeah.
But on that point, because, Brittney essentially already talked a bit about this, but what are you guys' view on the proliferation of STEAM, at adding arts into important, the broad, important knowledge base of STEM?
I think it's so important. It's not even I don't feel like it's a question anymore. And actually, I've always thought that art has been incorporated in science. It's just never been really regarded in that sense. Whenever we're developing any kind of graphic or presentation or something, there's art there. Paleo art, or it's just a different way to show what we know. It's a different way to communicate, right? Even when for us, when we're building an exhibit, right, there's a lot of artistry that has to go in there for us to connect to someone, whether we're doing it on an emotional level, whether we're connecting on a personal level. Art can help bridge those gaps and form that relatability that otherwise just hardcore science data may not be able to do. For me, when I was still doing more paleontological research, I was looking at, these things called desmostillion teeth, right? The teeth themselves they look weird, but for some people, they may not be that interesting for some people. But I had my brother help me create this really cool paleo art to show their life, how they change from a baby to an adult. And then once I got that, it told the story in a very visual way. And then once I incorporated the data into there, it helped me to explain this story of these animals much more easily. And so, yeah, I think art is very much a part of science, right? Even in the way that we think about things, the way that we're inspired. There is artistry in that, it's inherent. We just never really kind of gave it that forward thinking or its spotlight as much as it is getting today. But yeah, art is very, very important for science. There's no way that some of the things that we have created or done could have been made without the artistry, the inspiration that comes behind it.
Oh, so what I was just thinking is, I love history, and while historical science has a lot to answer for, one thing that I think we can say for it is that it used to be that if you were a scientist, you were often not only a scientist. You were many things at a time. I think nowadays science is very specialized. as paleontological researchers, we kind of fixate on one kind of species, one kind of animal, and that's fine. But I do think there is something to be said for generalism, for being able to focus on multiple different subjects and being able to think about not only science, but also think about art, also think about humanities and books and narrative and stuff like that. So I think that's one thing that we may have kind of lost as science has developed. It's something that we might want to try to regain, is that ability to think about things as a whole rather than sort of sectioning them out for each person. Yeah.
So my view on the proliferation of STEAM, I love it, because I think one of the things that one of the things that really, again, brought me into science and paleontology was not necessarily science itself, but rather how it was a part of all these other things that I loved. The fact that it was in the movies I watched, the fact that it was in the books I read. I remember another big fandom I'm a part of is I love the Muppets, and anything that Jim Henson does, not just the Muppets, but those big creatures that are in the Dark Crystal or in Labyrinth, I was always super interested as to wow, how do they even think of these animals? But those creatures draw inspiration from animals that we see around us, prehistoric life. And I think that for me, that's acknowledging how art, influences our lives as scientists, I think is extremely important, because I think it helps bring in more people. It helps sort of increase inclusivity, because often, just because, me and a peer of mine were both scientists, it doesn't necessarily mean that we'll be able to relate each other just by that one connection alone. Often we have other interests, and sometimes it's art, sometimes it's movies, sometimes we like reading the same comic books, or we enjoy the same series. I personally am very much I support and I love including art into sort of what was traditionally known as STEM, because I think it acknowledges all the different types of people and all the different interests and the complexities of who we are as, scientists within our own fields. We're not just scientists. We also enjoy all these other things, and they help us connect with each other on multiple levels. So I'm a huge fan of it. I think it helps students learn. It's helped me learn a lot. Like I said, whenever I see a series or some sort of creature on film or something, I'm like, that's really cool. I wonder what inspired that. I go in and I'm like, oh, I never even knew about this animal, or that's really awesome. I wonder how they sort of justify how an animal can fly in this series or something. It's just I think it's great.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I agree with Brittney that I think it was there previously, and we kind of slowly I think it's partially because the arts started getting defunded in schools. And because I remember, even over the course of my lifetime, when I was a young kid in primary school, we had a music teacher and an arts and culture teacher. And as I got older, those type of roles kind of just disappeared, at least in the school system in South Africa. But I do remember watching movies that touched on this, where it's okay, the music class is about to go away, or piano class is about to go away because it's getting defunded. So I think it's this general idea that the arts maybe not a safe bet for you to be, a safe field for you to be in to make money, and that's why we kind of lost it. But I think it's like Brittney was saying, we kind of chunked things out into these pieces of the pie, and I think our lives are essentially a whole pie. We're not one part of anything. We're a little bit of everything, and losing the arts, and essentially being a storytelling species, the stories, I think it's just become a thing over time. So it's weird. So I'm glad it's starting to become important again and being pushed, especially being important in science. So what other geeky things do you guys do that's pretty obscure that no one else likes to do?
for me, one thing that I started kind of doing recently is I do Star Wars toy figure photography. So I buy the Star Wars Black Series 6-inch figures, and then I do photography scenes with them to make them look like scenes from a movie. I have my own Instagram account for it now. I've only done a few photos, but that's something that I really love doing. That's kind of super geeky, and not a huge not a huge base in there, but it's something that I really enjoy doing because it lets me practice my photography, lets me like create these really cool scenes, and also I get to buy a bunch of Star Wars figures and call it art. So
So for me, I'm actually a fairly active member of the like vintage fashion community online. So I actually really enjoy dressing up in historical clothing. I have some clothing here that's like at least 100 years old. I have clothing from the 1910s and the 1920s and the 30s that I dress up in fairly regularly. I have reproduction clothing. So yeah, my thing is I dress up like I lived 100 years ago. So I'll dress up in vintage menswear, women's wear. When we could just still do that kind of thing, I'd go to events for that. I have friends all over the world who are active in that community. So that's kind of my real geeky thing is dressing
my favorite
up.
thing with that, Brittney. Sorry. My favorite thing with that is sometimes Brittney will be dressed up, right? And we're at like an event or something. And someone's like, oh my God, I love your costume. And then I'm like, that's just what she wears.
She just dresses up.
You know, I remember that from when I did a talk at a bar in Los Angeles. So I did a really fun talk, and I was dressed up in uppers, which are those like kind of action adventure-y 1920s pants. You know, they're very wide at the hips, and they thin out towards the bottom, and they go in a boot. So I had boots, jodhpurs, a waistcoat. I was wearing a tie, and I had my hair at that time. In lockdown, it's gotten quite longer, but at the time I had it cut in a 1920s bob. And yeah, somebody thought, like, you didn't say anything about your costume. And I was like, it's not a costume. This is just what I look like.
Yeah, I would. So I would say other geeky things I like to really do. Gabe and Brittney can probably both tell you, I'm a very, very big fan of hip hop. So I love listening to like 90s rap, and I love listening to even a lot of the modern stuff too. But I love just listening to a song over and over until I know the words, until I know all the references. So often what I'll do is like I'll listen to a song by an artist and I'll be like, I know that reference because it's referencing something else. And I love listening, reading, watching documentaries. I eat up hip hop history like candy. It's one of my favorite things to do. I'm a really big fan of I like watching sports with my brother. My brother and I both talk to each other about basketball or other things. So it's a different kind of geeky, I guess. It's just sort of outside of all the science fiction and books I like to read and whatnot, but it's still really fun. Back to the music thing. One of my favorite things to do is recognizing how geeky some of like my favorite hip hop artists are, in that they're constantly referencing things that I love to do. Like, so it's like it blends in all of my interests. So you have a hip hop artist who will start talking about Marvel characters, or they're still talking about other superheroes or Transformers, and like it's all mixing in. And if you can catch all those little references, it's just really fun. It's like, oh, I didn't know that so and so was talking about Decepticons in this one song. That's really interesting. Or, you know, it's just it's a fun it's a fun other like fandom I'm a part of. So
yeah. There's sometimes like references to anime in hip hop, which is really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I think I'm going to end on this question now because it's for me. It's like 1:30 in the morning, and you guys are really busy.
Oh man,
really busy. But if you guys had just a substantial budget for your science outreach and science communication and education efforts, what are the types of like cool, like high tech, new age things would you be trying to do in this space?
Oh, I know what I would do, or this is a dream I've already had, where we can where I would like to be able to take one of our pop-up museums, maybe probably our Star Wars inspired Galactic Archive, and make it so that we can like bring it to the max. You know, we'd have like the Jedi, like a replica of the Jedi archives. Like we'll have like all lights and like all the great cosplays, like all the animatronics in there. And then we'll make it super portable so that we can just bring it anywhere they want us to and for free. You know, I want to be able to bring it to schools, libraries, places where like science is really hard to access in the first place. So bring it to, you know, very, very underserved communities, and just be able to connect again things that people love and educate them on science and have them to have these critical thinking opportunities that they may not have. So if I had an unlimited budget, I would basically rebuild the Jedi Temple on wheels and bring that everywhere to teach people. And I would just be dressed as a Jedi all day, as a Jedi librarian teaching younglings about the galaxy. That's what I would do if we had an unlimited budget.
Pretty cool. What about you, Brittney?
Kind of the same. I was taking it to larger venues, more remote venues, like you said, where science is not as easily accessible, is kind of the big thing, is just making it so that it can reach more people. Gosh, I would just like to buy all sorts of casts and 3D prints as big as we wanted and throw them all in a truck and just go across the country with it. That would be amazing. So yeah, kind of the same thing. Just increase our reach and increase our effectiveness.
Do you have any funky ideas, Isaac? Or is it the same?
I think, I support what they're saying. I think it also would be really fun because, again, I live far away from Brittney and Gabe. I think it would be great to see like other chapters, and you know, I'm working on some stuff with Gabe in Chicago and trying to get sort of a group started there that's very interested and wants to do these kinds of things. It'd be nice to see sort of groups outside of the main group picking up and being just excited and doing similar things and empowering others of our peers or students who are just interested in doing scientific outreach through their, you know, many diverse interests. I think that's one of the, for me, that's one of the sort of my personal goals, even sort of just at a more broader scale for myself, is not just what kind of impact can I have, but also how can I empower those around me to have an impact on their own communities. And I think that would be great. I would love to sort of support smaller communities and help build them up so that they can put on their own events and do all the other kind of stuff. I think that's what I would like to do.
A pay it forward type of thing.
Yeah.
Cool. And with that, I think it's time for us to pack up our little exploration camp here and head back to our labs and or fantasy worlds. But first, why don't you guys let our fellow explorers know where they can find you guys and your work on the internet?
Yeah. So if you want to find out more about Cosplay for Science, you can check us out online. We have a website, cosplayforscience.com. We are on Instagram and we have a Twitter as well. And you can find all of those through our Cosplay for Science site. If you want to follow what I do, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram as @PaleoParadox.
Yeah, and I am available on all social media platforms @BritandBone with the "and" spelled out.
Yeah, and you can obviously find me on some of the Cosplay for Science stuff, but I'm also available on my personal Instagram if you want to follow me. I like to post some of my art stuff and other things I'm doing related to paleontology. It's thrashing_duende. Be excited to connect with some of you.
All right, cool. Thank you guys so much for joining me. And thank you guys at home, the listeners, for sparing your time. I hope you guys had fun learning with us. And hopefully you guys go and check out Cosplay for Science and learn from them. I hope you guys had fun. Otherwise, stay safe, stay well, stay tuned, and cheers.